How's everybody doing? You get fed so healthily here. I just need to say that. Not every Dharma center has Whole Foods and miraculous cooks making healthy lunches, so that's great. All right. So here we are at the home stretch, Sunday afternoon. Good for you guys for hanging in there this long. So we've been talking about, we're up to the point in the text where we're talking about increasing the conducive conditions for our enthusiasm, and those are these 4 powers. The first one is this appreciation / interest, esteem. So we've been talking about that in terms of the objects of that interest, abandoning faults, the qualities to be practiced, and then what is correct to do and what is not correct to do. And let's see, I think we've got up to verse 41. Did we not? Because we said that the root of interest is understanding the law of karma, and then that interest itself is the root of virtue. So that was where we ended up, that sort of, kind of stepwise relationship. So by understanding cause and effect, we'll develop this interest in creating virtue. And then they say that this is a really famous line too, in verse 40, the Muni or the Buddha himself has said that appreciation is the root of every class of virtue. And I think we can see that. Unless we take an interest in creating virtue, of course we're not going to do it. Unless we appreciate the reasons for creating virtue too. Why are we going to do it? So it's really through an understanding of karma. And then the next couple of verses are talking about karma, reflecting on cause and effect, just as a sort of a way of convincing us that that's true. So let's look at verse 41. Suffering, mental unhappiness, the various kinds of fear, as well as separation from what is desired, all of these will arise from negative deeds. So they're just kind of giving us the result of negative karma. Suffering, unhappiness, fear, separation from what's desired. By performing virtues intended in the mind, wherever I go, due to these merits, there I shall be honored with the excellences that are their results. And by performing virtues intended in the mind, Stephen Batchelor says, by committing wholesome actions which are motivated by aspiration in the mind. So that's what that means. It's just basically saying we're motivated to engage in wholesome actions, then we have beneficial results, the excellences that are their results. So in that verse 21, or verse 41, he's talking about the results of negative karma. Verse 42, talking about the results of positive karma. So we say that karma is definite, meaning that there's a correspondence in terms of type. So any negative action that we do will definitely result in suffering. Any positive action that we do will definitely result in short-term happiness, long-term liberation and enlightenment. One of the drags about karma is we're fooled by proximity. You go online to make a big donation to your favorite nonprofit organization, you feel so good, and you get up and fall down the stairs. And you go, why did that happen? I just did something really virtuous. There's a pesky lag period between cause and result. So if you made the donation and fell down the stairs right after, the falling down the stairs was the result of a non-virtue that you did maybe in a past life. And from the cause of making that big donation, you'll experience abundance later in this life or in some future life. So John Lennon was actually wrong. There is no such thing as instant karma. Okay, but we're fooled by that. But don't be fooled. There is this correspondence in terms of cause and effect. They say that in order to know exactly which cause led exactly to which result. Only a Buddha knows that exactly. But we know from what the Buddha has taught us in terms of general kind of flavors of karma, and I think some of you have probably studied the 10 non-virtues and the results of all of the 10 non-virtues, very specific, and the Buddha taught us that, okay? So this is basically saying there is that correspondence. Non-virtue leads to all of this horrible stuff, suffering, unhappiness, fear, and then virtues lead to these excellences that are their results. And then it goes on to say in verse 43, although one who commits misdeeds wishes for happiness, wherever he goes, there those misdeeds will completely destroy him with the weapons of suffering. And before we had this thing that said that somebody is hoping for happiness but never creating the cause for it, here it gets even worse. Somebody's hoping for happiness but creating a bunch of non-virtue. No way they're ever going to have happiness. They're just going to experience suffering. And then verse 44, as a result of virtue, I will become a spiritual child of the Sugatas, another synonym of Buddhas, dwelling in the hearts of vast, fragrant, and cool lotuses. The food of the victor's pleasant speech will cause my splendor to grow. My supreme body will emerge from a lotus that will unfold due to the light of the Munis, and I will abide in the presence of the victors. What on earth are they talking about? What's up with all these lotuses? What do you think? What's this verse talking about? Pure lands. Okay, Tara says pure lands. So there are these descriptions of these various pure lands or pure realms. And those are different from these pleasure being rebirths, okay? So we talked about the devas or pleasure being rebirths that experience a lot of sensory pleasure. This is a different address. These pure lands are said to be great places to continue practicing the path, and they're caused by virtues. So they often say the pure lands are these like paradises where you're receiving teachings all the time. You're surrounded by 10th level bodhisattvas. You're in the presence of Buddhas. It's supposed to be the express train to enlightenment, to get reborn in a pure realm, right? So it's not just enjoying those pleasures, it's about being reborn there. And so often in our dedication prayers, and some of you may have done practices where in your dedication prayers you go, best case scenario is enlightenment in this life. If that doesn't happen, plan B, get reborn in a pure land. If that doesn't happen, plan C, at least get another precious human rebirth like I have now. You know, some prayers have those three scenarios that we're sort of dedicating the merit, mostly because those pure lands are supposed to be such great places for practice. And that's what this verse is talking about. They say that you're not born, you know, you don't have a mother, you're born out of the middle of a lotus in the middle of a lake. I kind of think it's metaphorical, and there's sort of a deeper secret meaning to that. It isn't literally like when you go to the botanical gardens and see those lotuses, you're not going to see people popping out of the middle. I think it's sort of a metaphor, but that's another story. But that's what this verse is talking about, the results of virtue. And then 45, as a result of many non-virtues, I will be very wretched due to all my skin without exception being ripped off by the henchmen of Yama. Molten copper melted by tremendous heat will be poured into my body. Pierced by flaming swords and daggers, my flesh will be cut into hundreds of pieces, and I shall plummet upon the fiercely blazing iron ground. Wow. I have a student in Canada, and she's so cute. She loves verses like verse 44. She freaks out when we read verses like the one. She just goes, is it really like that? And I'm like, well, yeah, kind of, you know, by your karma. She's like, that's not very nice. Yeah, it's not. So that's sort of the summary of the suffering of the lower realms in one verse. So, you know, the choice is yours. The lotus in the Pure Land or the henchman of Yama. The choice is yours. And then the conclusion, the first two lines of verse 46, therefore I should be interested in virtue, gee, no kidding, and with great respect acquaint myself with it. So this whole section has been about interest in virtue on the basis of understanding cause and effect. That's why we went into this whole thing about karma, because clearly the first step of, you know, engaging in virtue is appreciating why we should, you know, becoming interested in it, having esteem for it. So this whole section has been about that. And the reason we do that, if we really believed everything's random, why bother? Eat, drink, and be merry. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right? Like if anything that you do, you can't change the result, it's all just random. Why would you be interested in creating virtue? It won't make any difference at all. So it's only by understanding that we're really going to be interested in engaging in positive deeds and creating that merit. Okay? So any questions? We're at the end of this whole section on interest, esteem, appreciation. Any questions before we move on about that power, the power of appreciation? Amy? Do you have a question? No, it's okay. Just checking. Are you sure? Yeah? Okay. Are we good? All right, we'll forge ahead. So the next power, and let's see, I think the power of, in this version of the translation, we're calling it stability, also known as steadfastness, right? So keeping with, stable effort, basically, as it says here in the outline. So it says, having undertaken through the procedure of Vajra, I should cultivate pride. And remember we said pride has two meanings. It means self-confidence and it means self-importance. And this is the whole section where the two meanings are going to flip-flop back and forth. So I'll refer a lot to Stephen Batchelor's translation. And here he says, having undertaken the wholesome in the manner of Vajra, I should then proceed to acquaint myself with self-confidence. So first of all, let me explain what this manner of Vajra, that refers to a sutra called the Vajra Victory Banner Sutra, which is the 6th chapter of the Avatamsaka Sutra. And it has this sort of analogy or metaphor in there. And it says that the Bodhisattvas and the Buddhas are like the sun, shining without discrimination on all beings. It's up to the being whether they're standing behind a building and not getting the rays of the sun, or if they're getting all the rays of the sun. But it's not like the sun says, oh, Desmond, he's not doing that well. I'm not going to shine on him. I'm going to shine on George right now. The sun just shines. So what it's talking about there is bodhisattvas just put out their positive energy, just benefit, try to benefit as much as possible. Remember yesterday we were talking about how the Buddha's power and sentient beings' karma have to meet halfway. So we need enough virtue to benefit from the Buddha's activities. You know, somebody was asking, why don't the Buddhas just help us? For God's sake, we're suffering. Why don't they just step up? Well, that's why it's up to us to have enough virtue that we can be open and receptive to their guiding influence. So that's what this is referring to, a passage in that sutra talking about the high-level bodhisattvas and the Buddhas being just like the sun, just shining, you know, without any discrimination. But it's just up to us whether we're behind a building in the shadow or not, you know. So that's what this is saying. So let's see, and then the next, so we should proceed to acquaint myself with self-confidence. So the pride in your translation means self-confidence in this context. And then the next verse, at the beginning, having examined the endowments, I should either undertake it or not undertake it. It is best not to undertake it, but once I have undertaken it, I should not withdraw. So what this verse is saying is, before we start some virtuous action, we should really examine, are we going to be able to pull it off or not? And if not, we shouldn't even start. When it says it is best not to undertake it, that doesn't mean in general. It's not that Master Shantideva is telling you, don't engage in virtue, it's better not to. What he's saying is, it's actually a worse imprint in our minds if we start something and don't finish it. Like if we start a virtue and give up somehow out of discouragement, that's supposed to, make a really, really bad imprint in our minds. It's better to really evaluate, hey, can I do this or not? And then if we decide that we're not ready yet, remember our whole conversation about the capacity and the potatoes and the arms and legs. Decide, do you have the capacity yet? And then if you decide you can, go for it. But it's better to really do that analysis, because you can imagine the imprint it makes in our mind if we're always starting some virtuous project and dropping it, and starting it and dropping it, and starting it and giving up. Then it creates kind of this imprint of failure and giving up in our minds. So again, Master Shantideva is really cautioning us to just be realistic about our capacity. And if we decide we can't do something right now, just don't even begin, right? And again, this is up to all of us to decide where that balance lies. I have so many people that come to me, and I'm a survivor of this myself, feeling bad that I'm not Lama Zopa. Well, guess what? Join the club. We kind of have, like I say, we kind of have that vision of the role models that we admire so much, but we don't realize it's a process. We hear about Buddhahood. It shouldn't be yet one more reason to have low self-esteem. Oh, I thought I was like a pretty okay person. I've been in therapy for all these years. Now I just heard about Buddhahood. Yet another way to be wrong, because I'm not a Buddha yet. It's easy for us to go to that place without seeing, hey, it's a gradual process, step by step by step. We shouldn't hear about Buddhahood or look at Lama Zopa and immediately feel crappy about ourselves. There's no benefit to that at all, So I think this is why all of this business is in the enthusiasm chapter, because by being realistic about our capacity, we'll be able to maintain our joy. There's nothing that's more of a joy killer than feeling bad that you're not enlightened yet, just because you heard about the idea of enlightenment last Tuesday. Oh, bummer, I'm not there yet, right? So it's really important to take this to heart. Pema Chodron, this brilliant teacher that I know a lot of you are probably familiar with, this American nun, she has this great book called Start Where You Are. And I just love that. If that could just be our mantra, hey, start where you are, and just to have faith in the path and progressing step by step. So this is what they're talking about, Master Shantideva in verse 47. Just really examine, don't start if you can't finish something, because he says, I will familiarize with that in other rebirths. And what he means, that he's talking about is giving up. So he's saying, I'll have a habit of failure, which I'll then take into other rebirths, and negativities and suffering will increase. Also, others and the time of the result will be inferior and will not be accomplished. And let me read Stephen Batchelor. He says, if I do, in other words, if I do give up, then this habit will continue in other lives, and wrongdoing and misery will increase. Also, other actions done at the time of its fruition will be weak and will not be accomplished. Okay, so it's just kind of emphasizing what a bad imprint it is to start something and not finish. Better to just be realistic about our capacity and then, you know, carry through to the end with our virtuous activities. So any questions about that? Yeah, Amy. Oh, okay, wait for the mic.
This is a question before, when you were talking about the two kinds of, the choice between the hell realms and the Buddha fields. And it's always very, that's a very hard one for me, and the only way I've been able to handle that description, because I feel like I've come from the punishing God, and it relates to that. I just want to throw that out as something you may have something to say about.
Yeah, and it's so, you know, it's interesting. Sometimes when I've taught introductory courses, I get to the point of karma, people leave, they drop out, right? Because they're so used to this idea that I'm being judged and punished for being bad, and they can't see cause and effect in any other way. And they go, that was the religion of my upbringing that I gave up. I don't want to hear it. And there's something, you know, there's a lot of differences in Buddhism. One is, nobody's punishing you. There's no God to punish. There's no supreme being punishing you for being bad. So that's one thing. What's happening is, there's an imprint in our mind from doing that negative action that when the right causes and conditions come together, well, like I said yesterday, play a movie to our mind of that experience, similar to that imprint that was put in our mind. So it's nothing external to us. There's no judgment and blame involved. And I think that's what people really react to sort of viscerally, right? Because that does remind us of like the hellfire brimstone thing. But it's so different. It's like it's just like, you know, and one of the analogies given is, if you drink poison, why are you surprised you get sick or die? It's like if you do something to yourself, you're going to experience the result of that. And there's no external being. And there's no judgment. Because the thing is, until a very high level of realization, we all have deep pockets of both negative and positive karma. There's no karmic cause that we have not created for any experience you can imagine. We happen to be riding an upswell right now with this precious human rebirth of these amazing circumstances, but we've got karma in that pocket for any kind of existence. So there's no like, I mean, the only difference between us and a hell realm being is a matter of timing. We just happen to be experiencing the result of the causes for the precious human rebirth, but the potential for hell realms is still right there. So nobody's worse than anybody else. We've got the causes for all of it. The point is just to purify and accumulate virtues so we won't have that experience and we can help others. But it is hard for us to remove that feeling of judgment and condemnation from the idea of karma, for sure.
It isn't, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
It's partially that, but I think the other part is the graphicness of it and the extreme description of it.
Yeah.
And that has, for me, has a very primitive quality. The only way I've been able to handle that has been using it as a metaphor, or using it as someone who's gone crazy and has that kind of, has that hell in one's mind. But the actual description I find very, very hard to handle. And you said it's either this or that, and I imagine Lama Zopa saying that.
Yeah, and you know, and I'm just, what I'm saying is, you know, like in that last verse, it's kind of like, well, there's this option and that option. Which one do you think you'd rather be experiencing? I think it is hard for us to really, one of the stories I told yesterday, and I don't know, you might not have been here when I was telling the story of this woman in Taiwan who was having these visions of other realm beings in the monastery in Taiwan where Lama Zopa was teaching. And Lama Zopa asked her, please describe what you're seeing, because she was standing there in what looked like an empty, because we had this discussion a little bit yesterday, is it metaphorical to different experiences in the human realm, or is it actual other realms of experience? And there was a woman attending teachings by Lama Zopa Rinpoche in Taiwan, and she would look out at what looked to the rest of us like an empty monastery courtyard, and she saw it full of preta beings and hell realm beings going through unimaginable sufferings. And Lama Zopa was saying, please talk about what you're seeing so that people will be convinced that these other realms of existence really do exist. Again, I think we have such an imprint of like hellfire and brimstone and being sort of punished into being virtuous that we really react to that. And that's just something very cultural for us. It's interesting, there's a book by Alex Berzin, and it used to be called something like Relating to a Spiritual Teacher, and now it's called something else, but it's all about this idea of how to relate properly to a spiritual teacher. And he gets into some of these cultural differences, and he says, yeah, a lot of these Tibetan lamas will be really, really heavy and always be criticizing their students and never give them positive feedback. But he said, culturally, they're dealing with like really arrogant teenage monks, and they need to sort of beat them up a little bit. And then he goes, if they're dealing with Westerners who already have low self-esteem, and then they're like shouting at you and criticizing, you just slink out of there on your belly. You're just like, I'm hopeless. So he said there's a real cultural difference too, and I think some of these verses that seem like they're bludgeoning us with the punishment are to wake us up, but it's a little bit different in our culture because we have a history of that too, you know. And I don't know what to say, but it is meant to be literal, that there are these realms created by our karma, you know, that many beings can see, maybe not us at our level of development, but many beings can see and describe. There's a biography of a Thai forest monk. It's called the biography, I think his name is Achan Mun, and he describes, and this is not even a Tibetan shaman thing, this is like a strict Thai forest tradition monk. And in his biography, his main disciple who wrote the biography after he passed away, by the way, in this biography, there's a description of when he actually attained liberation. That's mind-blowing. And he teaches the monks up until like midnight, and then after that he teaches different Deva realm beings. You know, and he just describes, oh, the Devas from this neighborhood come on Tuesday night from midnight to 2 a.m. and then the Deva... And I'm like, whoa, this isn't even a Tibetan thing. This is like this time. So yeah, these beings can see beings from different realms. And so I think we need to suspend our, you know, doubt and just sort of believe all of these accounts, or at least be open-minded that it's possible, and that these different realms really do exist. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I had a question about this. So this question of starting an endeavor that, and only starting it when you know you can finish, I'm wondering if you'd say something about how that relates to the whole practice, because in terms of striving for enlightenment, maybe that's something I don't think I can achieve, but I'm still encouraged to start that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And Friday night, the meditation, there were sort of various parts, and one part that struck me personally in the sense that I hadn't thought of it as such a strong influence as maybe it actually has been on me is this idea of mediocrity, of the fact that there is no, there is either sort of failure or success, and in the middle I see very little. And I saw a lot of examples from my past of really pushing for something and, let's say, succeeding more than a lot of people might have expected, but not all the way, and then you kind of really crash down, and people even laugh at you. People justify their own their own decisions by your failure, so they really even actively push you down. So I realized that actually, you know, a lot of the discussion even Friday about, in terms of fears of the path, had to do with fear of a lot of change. And I always thought for myself too that it was a fear of a lot of change, but actually there's a big aspect to me which was fear of not enough change, fear of not going all the way, and then really crashing down. So I'm wondering if you could just talk about this passage in terms of the fact that we are supposed to enter this path, which is it seems impossible.
No, I think it's a great question, and wow, that we could spend the rest of the afternoon on that, you know. I think what this passage is saying is kind of with our short-term goals, like we might have the vision of enlightenment, like I was saying, I think it was yesterday or maybe this morning, I'm losing track, His Holiness having this thing of like, we should be able to see change, but understanding that enlightenment is a really long-term project, like many, many, many lifetimes. And I think what this verse is speaking to more is for the short-term achievable goals, right? Like not so much going, well, you don't know when you're going to get enlightened, so don't even begin, but saying, okay, instead of saying, I'm going to meditate 2 hours every morning before I go to work, make it realistic and say, I'm going to try and sit for 15 minutes and watch my breath 5 days a week, because that's doable, and then you won't have the imprint of failure, of setting the bar so high that you're not able to do it and you always fail, and you set the bar high and you always fail, and you set the bar. But I think he's kind of talking more about like more short-term achievable kind of goals and projects that we do. And I see this a lot. I have a friend in California. He goes to a teaching by Choden Rinpoche or Lama Zopa, gets all excited. He works at a really physical job. He's a pipe fitter, so he's like climbing up in ceilings, installing fire sprinkler systems all day long. He's got his own company, so really hard and physical. Well, he decides he's going to wake up every morning at 4 o'clock in the morning and meditate for 3 hours before he goes to his hard physical job. That lasts about 4 days. And then I get a call from his girlfriend who says, can you come talk to him? He just packed up his altar and put it in the closet and put away all his prayers and his books. And I'm like, dude, can you just be like about things? Like, do you have to be so extreme? And I think that's kind of what this verse is saying is, don't be so extreme that you're always going to be like my friend and give up. Do things that are achievable, and then, you know, after a while, 15 minutes in the morning is going to be so easy, you're going to want to increase it to 20 and then do that for a while and then increase like that. But, you know, we set our sights on this really long-term goal of Buddhahood, if that appeals to us, and then we get there by small, tiny little stages and setting the short-term goals. And I think that, I mean, hopefully that helps. That's the way I take this verse, without being so extreme that we're always going to fail and give up and be discouraged, you know. Otherwise, we do 15 minutes 5 days a week. That's easy. We have an imprint of success, and then we're happy to take on the next thing, and then slowly, slowly our capacity increases. But that's a great point, you know, because it's something that we all sort of struggle with. Is the roof leaking?
Something true.
It's not raining, is it? No. Oh, okay. Okay. Anything else? Yeah, Alan.
Yeah, the question that was asked prior to the last about which I could relate to very strongly, about the idea that of a punishing God and a loving God. You know, I've been in a spiritual practice outside of this for a very long time.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of mention about, you know, trying to reverse maybe former teachings or exposure to the fact that there is a punishing God.
Yeah.
That's been revealed to to people, and that there's a choice that can be made. That there is that choice, but for myself, my own experience, I do feel like the challenges in life seem very punishing. Where I want the other, you know, I want the love, I want the compassion, I want the forgiveness in my life.
Yeah.
But knowing how to be in the process of discovering how to make that change seems much more easier said than done.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
For some, like myself.
Right.
And like I pick up on your process and your inspiration that you're offering, and I'm fully appreciating it. But somehow I'm not. Like, it seems to me also that we're in all different places spiritually, as well as enlightened, processes.
Yeah.
And that accepting ourselves as we are right now is like a helpful.
Oh, absolutely.
It's helpful, but
absolutely.
Just how to go further into.
Well, I think, what I would say to that is, again, understanding that we start to create the cause. We might not experience the result for a while. There is this lag period between cause and result. But those causes, those karmic seeds are never lost, so it comes at a certain point of trusting the process and not expecting necessarily really quick, immediate results, but going, because there's this relationship of cause and effect, that no virtuous deed that I do is ever lost. I will experience a result. Maybe not even in this life. Maybe the rest of this life is just going to be a drag. But I believe that if I try and turn my mind to virtue, try and benefit others, and you see this. There's the big question, I think, in every religious tradition. Why do good people suffer? And that's the reason, because of the lag between cause and result. Because they're a good, virtuous person in this life, they're creating the cause for a future life to reap the benefits of all of that they've done. What they're experiencing now was caused in the past, and that's true for all of us, for better and for worse, So I think not being discouraged by that, I think one of the biggest causes of discouragement is not understanding that and expecting things to just change overnight, because then we'll really be discouraged. But again, like His Holiness says, trusting it's a really long-term project over many, many lifetimes. There is a joy in transforming our mind. The external environment might take a while to catch up. Like if we try and turn our minds towards loving kindness and compassion, that'll make us happier right now, even if our external circumstances might still seem like a disaster. It might take a while for that to take effect, And that's kind of a bitter pill to swallow, but that's just sort of the way that cause and effect works. But I think just trusting the path and trusting the process and not giving up. And then I've found in my life, even within the couple of decades that I've really been practicing seriously, I've seen the results, I feel like, of my practice. We say if we practice really diligently, put a lot of effort in, we will see the effect even within this life. Like for a lot of karma, we experience it in future life, but there is a way to make karma very powerful so that you experience it even in this life. I don't know if that helps, but that's kind of the way I look at it and the way I try and practice. Yeah. Yeah. All right. I've lost track. Where are we? Okay. So okay. Oh, 48? 47? 48. 49. Okay. 48. There's a different, we'll start with 48 because, okay. I will familiarize with that. Oh yeah, we did that. We'll familiarize with that habit of giving up. Then our negativities increase. Also, other actions done at the time of its fruition will be weak and will not be accomplished. Now, we're starting to talk about pride in both ways, in both meanings, both self-confidence and self-importance. So I'm going to read a little bit from Stephen Batchelor's because he differentiates these two. So Stephen Batchelor's version of verse 49 says, self-confidence should be applied to wholesome actions, the overcoming of disturbing conceptions, and my ability to do this. Thinking I alone shall do it is the self-confidence of action. So that's a little more clear than the verse in your version. So the pride that we're talking about here is self-confidence. And here in the second line of your verse where it says actions, afflictions, and ability, that means wholesome actions, the overcoming of disturbing conceptions, and my ability to do this. Thinking I alone shall do it is the self-confidence of action. So remember earlier in this chapter when we were talking about the four forces and talking about stability and steadfastness, the very next verse gave the four and substituted self-confidence for steadfastness. And that's what these verses are going back to. Basically, self-confidence is a cause for this kind of stability in our practice and that, steadfastness, because we believe we can do it. We have that confidence that says, yeah, I can do it, which is the total opposite to that low self-esteem of every being has Buddha nature but me. There's no way I can pull it off. So this is a super important thing to develop that really supports our enthusiasm. Verse 50, powerless, their minds disturbed, people in this world are unable to benefit themselves, therefore I shall do it for them, since unlike me these beings are incapable. Okay? This is the kind of confidence we have to have. And Lama Zopa Rinpoche is very fond of saying this thing that always makes us groan. Whenever he's kind of setting motivations or dedicating merit, he goes, by myself alone, I will benefit all sentient beings. And we're going, because we're like, oh my God, all by myself. But that's kind of what he's talking about. We have to have that confidence that says, I'm just going to do it. I don't care. Nobody else may understand what I'm doing. Everybody else may be completely clueless. It's up to me to help others, And it's not the pride of self-importance. It's not hubris. It's this self-confidence. And that's why these verses keep flip-flopping between afflictive pride, that self-importance, and this kind of intense confidence that we have to have about our practice. So verse 51, even if others are doing inferior tasks, why should I sit there doing nothing? I do not do these tasks because of self-importance. It would be best for me to have no such pride. So this is the other type of pride, right? So he's saying, even if other beings are sitting around doing nothing, that shouldn't influence me. I should, go ahead and help. And that isn't self-importance, it's just this confidence. And then this next verse is this kind of funny sort of analogy. It says, when encountering a dead snake, even crows will act as though they are Garudas. If I am weak, I shall be harmed by even a small downfall. So a Garuda is this kind of mythological animal in sort of Indian mythology, and it's sort of like this eagle that is able to overcome and eat snakes. And so here it's saying, if a snake is dead, even crows act like they're some kind of mighty eagle, right? And can overcome even a dead snake. And so it's saying, if I'm wimpy and have no confidence at all, then any kind of mental affliction and downfall will be able to overtake me, right? So it's kind of talking about the drawbacks of not having confidence. You're so swayed. You know, anytime any disturbing emotion comes up, it completely throws you off base, motivates you to engage in unwholesome actions, and then you're lost, right? With that kind of a weak, wimpy mind. So we really need to be confident. Verse 53, how do the faint-hearted who've given up exerting themselves find liberation from destitution? By generating pride and exertion, even the great will find it hard to overcome me. So I'll read Stephen Batchelor. How can those who, out of faint-heartedness, have given up trying to find liberation because of this deficiency? Yet even the greatest obstacle will find it hard to overcome one with a firm mind. Right? So he's saying if we have that kind of self-confidence, if we have that kind of really strong, firm mind, then even huge obstacles won't be able to overcome us. Therefore, with a steady mind, I shall overcome the downfalls. If I'm defeated by a downfall, my wish to be victorious over the three realms will become a joke. I will conquer everything, and nothing at all shall conquer me. I, a son of the lion-like victor, shall dwell in this pride. So that's the pride of self-confidence. So this again is another nice cheerleading verse, right? Saying, I won't let any obstacles, any afflictions, anything overwhelm me. I'll be strong enough, steady enough, self-confident enough to conquer everything. And then the next couple of verses are talking about the two different kinds of pride. And the reason that in your translation pride is used for both self-confidence and self-importance, it's the same word in Tibetan. And the word is Nagyal, which literally means I, king. Na means I, and Gyal means king. So I am the king, and it means both kinds of pride, both self-confidence and self-importance. So verse 56, whoever has, I'm going to read from Stephen Batchelor because this is where he differentiates the two. Whoever has self-importance is destroyed by it, is disturbed, and has no self-confidence. For those with self-confidence do not succumb to the power of the enemy, whereas the former are under the sway of the enemy of self-importance. So he's differentiating these two kinds of pride, the afflictive one of self-importance, and then the positive kind of pride, which is the self-confidence. And he says, self-importance, and that's that egotistical, me first, it's all about me, everything has to go my way kind of attitude. So he's saying basically that's a total mistake, but we should definitely have self-confidence. And if we have that self-confidence, we're strong enough not to fall into the afflictions. In verse 57, inflated by the disturbing conception of my self-importance, I shall be led by it to the lower realms. It destroys the joyous festival of being human. I shall become a slave eating the food of others, stupid, ugly, feeble, and everywhere disrespected. Tough people bloated by conceit are also counted among the self-important. Tell me, what is more pathetic than this? Not much, in my view. So these are all of the, he's talking in these two verses about all of the drawbacks of self-importance, that kind of pride. So you'll be led to the lower realms. It destroys your precious human rebirth. You become a slave eating the food of others. You become stupid, ugly, feeble, everywhere disrespected. So basically, that kind of self-importance has all of those drawbacks. And then he says, whoever seizes self-confidence in order to conquer the enemy of self-importance, they are the self-confident ones, the victorious heroes. And in addition, whoever definitely conquers the spread of this enemy, self-importance, completely wins the fruit of a conqueror, fulfilling the wishes of the world. So this is basically talking about the advantages, the benefits of self-confidence as the antidote to self-importance. And I know in your verse they use pride throughout. Half of them mean self-importance, half of them mean self-confidence. But hopefully Stephen Batchelor's translation made it a little bit more easy to understand. And then in verse 60, I'll go back to your translation. When amidst a class of afflictions, I shall be persistent with them in 1,000 ways, meaning persistent in overcoming them, like a lion among foxes and the like, I will not be injured by the host of afflictions. Just as men will guard their eyes in the occurrence of great danger, likewise, I shall not come under the power of the afflictions, even when danger occurs. It would be better for me to be burned, to be killed, or have my head cut off, sorry, Amy, rather than bowing down to the enemy of afflictions. Likewise, in all situations, I should do nothing other than what is fit. Okay, so it's saying we shouldn't fall under the power of afflictions in the slightest, but we should really develop that self-confidence and be stronger. That's what the lion among foxes, that might not mean much to New Yorkers, but that's what that means, is to be stronger and be able to overcome the afflictions through that self-confidence. So throughout this whole section, instead of really using the word steadfastness or stability, we've talked about self-confidence, because that's kind of the ground for that steadfastness. If we have that confidence in our practice, something that we really have to work on a lot, right? Because a lot of us do have. I mean, I think it's a plague, especially for Americans. You know, I've traveled and taught in a lot of countries. Low self-esteem, it's such an American thing. It totally is. I mean, in Australia and New Zealand even, they don't have it. Europeans don't have it nearly as much as we do. They're like, what are you on about? But it's really sort of an American, even the Canadians, you'd think they'd be more like us, but they're like, I don't know what you're talking about with this low self-esteem. I think it's a cultural thing. It's weird, yeah, but so we need to really work harder maybe than some people in other cultures that don't really have this kind of plague of low self-esteem to generate that confidence and go like, we can do it. You know, listen to His Holiness when he just always is going, never give up, just never give up. You can do it. You know, we all can do it. Master Shantideva is saying the same thing. So, any questions? We're done now with this power of steadfastness. So, any questions to clarify about this section? Anything at all? We're just ripping through these verses. See, you didn't think I was going to be able to finish by 5 o'clock, did you? We might even be a little bit early, which would be awesome. Okay. So the next verses are about the power of joy. The third of these 4 powers that really support our enthusiasm. And so we'll go back to your translation, and then I'll read from Stephen Batchelor if we need to clarify anything. So Master Shantideva says, just like those who desire the pleasurable result of play, this Bodhisattva adheres to whatever task he may do. He's not satiated by it. It makes him happy. So this is basically saying Bodhisattvas are just so happy, just like children at play. They engage in practice and in benefiting others with just the same joy that a child does when they know it's recess or playtime. You know, that's the same kind of joy that a bodhisattva. Bodhisattvas never have enough of benefiting others and engaging in their practice. So this is the kind of joyfulness in our practice that we're trying to aspire to. Not doing it because Lama Zopa said I had to, but doing it because we take joy in it. And then the next verse, although people work in order to be happy, it is uncertain whether or not they will be happy. But how can those whose work itself is happiness find happiness without doing the work? So the first two verses are talking about people who work in order to be happy. And in the commentary, they say a lot of people do, for a living, have to do something that's non-virtuous. So even though they're working to try and find happiness, actually through their livelihood, they're creating non-virtue. So it's never going to lead to happiness. And that's one of the other drawbacks sometimes to studying Buddhism, is sometimes we have to change our livelihood. Like, quite seriously, I had a student in California, and she had this real cushy job. She was a marine biologist at the Monterey Bay Research Center, which is like the dream job of every marine biologist in the world. For her research project, she had to kill jellyfish. She was doing some research project where in order she had to harvest, I mean, I love that word, like it was apples. It's actually a sentient being. She had to take jellyfish and kill them and dissect them for a research project. So after studying Buddhism for a while, she came to me and she goes, I just can't do this anymore. I don't feel like I can do this. She goes, but I'm going to lose my job. You know, but I feel like I'm willing to take the hit because I just can't kill these animals anymore. And I said, I said, why don't you talk to your boss, out yourself as a Buddhist, go talk to your boss and just say, look, this is what's going on for me, and I've got this dilemma. So she was like, wow, I never thought of that. I thought I was just going to hand in my resignation. I go, talk to your boss. He may really get what's going on for you. There's no harm in it anyway. You're ready to resign. He was able to transfer her to another job within the same, he totally got it. He was so sympathetic, transferred her to another job where she didn't have to kill sentient beings. It was some other thing. And so that was great. But sometimes we have these moral dilemmas that come up. The more we study and the more our ethics becomes fine-tuned, sometimes it's no longer comfortable to engage in the livelihood that we were involved with before. So that's just kind of one of the, sometimes the hard choices that we have to make when we get involved in Buddhism. And there's no easy way out. But I just say, trust in your virtue, trust in karma, make those changes. Everybody I know who's done it, it's worked out okay. Nobody becomes homeless, just because, in order to practice ethics, they make one of those decisions. It always, as Venerable Rubina always quotes Lama Yeshe. One of my favorite quotes, she says, Lama Yeshe always used to say to her, karma takes care, dear. Karma takes care. So we kind of have to trust in the power of our virtue. But that's what this verse is talking about. Even though people want to be happy, they engage in creating the causes for unhappiness. But for bodhisattvas, their work to benefit beings is happiness itself. It just brings them more and more joy. So that's kind of contrasting what the bodhisattva's action to benefit others that brings them happiness. And then the next verse, if I'm not satiated by desirable objects, which are like honey smeared upon a razor's edge, then why am I satiated by merit, which is ripening and pacification in happiness? So this is a really famous kind of metaphor, this thing of honey on a razor blade, honey on a razor's edge, which just makes me wince to even think about, right? But it's kind of talking about that thing about the actions that we do to pursue sensory pleasures are often non-virtuous and they'll hurt us. The sense pleasure may taste sweet in the moment, but there's a bite behind it, you know, and sooner or later we'll suffer. Stephen Batchelor says, if I feel that I never have enough sensual objects which are like honey smeared upon a razor's edge, then why should I ever feel I have enough merit which ripens in happiness and peace? So there, Master Shantideva is kind of encouraging us to be a little bit insatiable with our virtue. I have a friend who's a Buddhist teacher, and he says, be a merit hog, be a virtue pig. You know, just go for it. Just gobble it all up. And that's kind of what these verses are saying. Like, never feel like, oh, I helped the little old lady across the street today. That's enough virtue for today. I'm done. Right? We should be really go for every opportunity to create merit that we can. And then this last verse in this section about joy, a very ancient Indian sort of example, as most of them are. It says, thus, in order to complete this task, I shall engage in it just as an elephant tormented at midday enters into a lake. So you could just imagine a really hot elephant that sees this lake and just plunges in to get this relief and just says, ah, yes. And that's exactly the kind of attitude that we should have. No hesitation at all. You can just imagine the elephant just doesn't even think about it, just goes for it. And that's exactly the kind of attitude that we should have for engaging in virtue. So again, it comes slowly, you know, and as we kind of carry on the path, we find that the path itself makes us happier and happier and happier. And then it's like the snowball effect, and we just keep wanting more. We just keep doing more virtue. And the more selfless we are, the happier we are. Like His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, if you want to be happy, be smart about your happiness. Practice happiness wisely. He talks about enlightened self-interest. He says if you really want to become happy, overcome self-cherishing. Just get rid of your own personal agenda. Weirdly enough, that's actually the key to happiness right there, is just getting over yourself and serving others, you know? And I think if we really check in our experience, like I mentioned, when I teach classes over 6 weeks, 8 weeks, I have students, and I really urge you to do this, even though this is our last afternoon together for a while at least, keep a notebook and notice, when do you have a subjective experience of happiness, and then backtrack. What just happened? And for most people, it's either this thing of feeling like they're just in the moment. Something has brought their attention 100% in the moment. That just feels good, like being in the present moment. There's even been psychologist research how mindfulness and being in the present moment is feels better than even fantasizing about some extraordinary thing. And a lot of people notice that, and a lot of people notice that benefiting others makes them feel really happy. I had an experience a long time ago where I used to live in California, Santa Cruz. I would sort of describe it as like a hippie surfer college town, isn't it, Rama? Rama's from there too, you know, it's this unique kind of interesting place. And so once I got a phone call from a teacher in a Waldorf school, and the teacher said, could you come in and talk to the 7th grade? And I'm like, sure, what's any special topic? She goes, well, you know, the 13-year-old boys are being mean to the girls. And I'm kind of like, gee, I thought it was a 13-year-old boy's job description to be mean to the girls. Only in Santa Cruz do they need a Buddhist nun to deal with this. I'm like, yeah, right, okay, whatever. So I go in, and there they are, and man, teaching teenagers is hard. They're all, oh, you know, they were a tough audience. they're right next to the Maori gang members in New Zealand in maximum security prison. Those two and the 13-year-olds are the toughest, the hardest sell I've ever had. So anyway, I had them do a meditation, and because they were 13, it would only lasted about 7 minutes because that was their attention span. And I said, think about, when you were the happiest. Cast your mind back over your, 13 years of life and try and think about the moments that you were the happiest. And I didn't prompt them. I mean, I was going to talk to them about compassion, but I didn't start with that. And then we did a go-round, and even I was amazed. I mean, even though I knew the right answer, it was amazing. A group of about 25 kids, not one of them said, when I got that thing I wanted for Christmas or my birthday, it was all about relationship. They all said things like, oh, when I'm hanging around with my friends and we're laughing and we're getting along, or when my older brother comes home from college and my family's together again. A lot of them said stuff about helping others. For them, it was like, oh, when I help my little sister with her homework. And I was blown away. I mean, you'd think no kind of class of human beings would be more self-absorbed than 13-year-olds, but not one of them said something about like getting what they wanted. And then that was kind of the lesson. I just like had them go around and talk about what made them happy. So I think it's true what Lord Buddha says, it's not really about getting all those things. It's really more about getting over ourselves and giving to others and really serving others. And that really is the cause of happiness. So, we find out. And like I say, gradually we do it more and more. And then it's sort of the snowball effect. In time, we'll end up like the Dalai Lama. Wouldn't that be awesome? Okay. I think we'll take a break now. And then we'll come back. We've got one more section to go. We're right on time. So let's take maybe about 15 minutes. Can we come back at 3:30 and then we'll finish the rest of the text and see if there's any last urgent questions. So we finished the power of joy. So all of those last verses that we did was all about kind of this, really having this joyous attitude about virtue. And I love this analogy. I can just imagine that elephant just plunging into the cool lake after being tortured by the midday sun. So then next we've just got one verse about the power of suspension. Some translators call it the power of relinquishment, or the power of just plain old rest. So in your translation, it says, when my strength is related to degeneration, which basically just means when my strength declines, right? That's another translation. I should leave whatever I'm doing in order to return to it. If something is finished well, I should put it aside with the wish for more and more later. And so we talk about two kinds of suspension or two kinds of rest. And one of them is called periodic suspension. And that just kind of basically refers to just taking a break. Like you're not done with your virtuous activity, whatever that is, but you're really exhausted. So you just take a break with the attitude, I'll return back to it later on. And you can see in your outline, periodic suspension is the first two lines of that verse. So it's not giving up before you've finished, right? That's different than what we were talking about before, which is saying you leave everything half done and you just quit. This is just saying take a break and then get back to it after you've rested and rejuvenated. And then total suspension, if something is finished well, I should put it aside with the wish for more and more later. And that's the opposite from what we were talking about before. This creates an imprint of like, I did it, right on, I did great. I just can't wait until I have an opportunity to do that again. So it gives a nice imprint in our minds of like successfully completing virtue. And then that's why in the verse it says, with the wish for more and more later, because then we'll be really happy to engage in that virtue at some other time, because we feel like we've succeeded, we've done it really well, we've completed it well. So I love it that Master Shantideva says one of the things that really helps our enthusiasm is knowing when it's appropriate to rest and take a break. Another thing that we need to really learn how to do, because sometimes we just get into this like pushing, striving mind, and we think there's something wrong with taking a break. And Friday night, I remember this lady, Luna, who was there, and she said, how do you know when you're taking a break, and how do you know when you're kind of lapsing into idleness? And, you know, for me, I really, again, like I say, my litmus test is, have I lost my joy in whatever virtue I'm doing, and I'm starting to feel really burned out about it and not happy about it and not motivated joyfully? Then I know I need a break. And then when I notice for myself, I get kind of sick of taking a break. You just feel like, oh gosh, okay, I've been reading novels for more than about a day and a half. I'm kind of sick of that. I want to kind of get back into, you know, doing something meaningful and beneficial. But sometimes we can err on the side of idleness. I had a friend who lived in a Dharma center, which shall remain nameless. She had a roommate who got completely addicted to Netflix, another nun, and they shared a room, and she was talking to me about it, and she's like, she got kind of burned out in a major way, and she felt like this other nun, not my friend, but the other nun, she said she felt like she needed a break. But then she got totally into this whole Netflix, and she goes, every night in our room, I'm trying to do my practice, my roommate's sitting in front of her computer just watching Netflix. So that's the other extreme. That's the extreme of idleness, right? So again, we need to kind of balance out. But this is saying it is appropriate to rest. You know, it really is appropriate to take breaks, just so that we will be able to, like the verse say, you know, get back into the saddle and kind of keep up with our virtue later on. So any questions? I mean, that was just one like brief verse, and it's kind of a big topic, but any questions about the power of rest, the power of suspension? Kind of how do we work with that? Okay. Again, very individual. Somebody may be taking an appropriate amount of rest, and we might see it as idleness, and it's not. They've worked to the maximum of their capacity, and they really need that break. And so again, it's really important not to judge what other people are doing. Okay? And then the next section, devoting oneself to the practice of the conduct by means of mindfulness and introspection. So for this next section, we're talking about 3 different qualities, and let's look at these for a minute. There's 3 different qualities that we bring to our practice. Conscientiousness, also sometimes known as heedfulness, mindfulness, and introspection. So mindfulness and introspection, some of you may be familiar with these words that we talk about a lot when we're talking about developing our meditation practice. Mindfulness is the quality of mind, and that's why when Zoe was saying Thich Nhat Hanh, you know, really emphasizes mindfulness, I said mindfulness means about 3 or 4 different things in different Buddhist contexts. In this context of Master Shantideva, in the context of learning how to meditate well, mindfulness refers to keeping your mind fixed on the object. So if we're talking about single-pointed concentration, let's just take breath awareness meditation as an example. Mindfulness means keeping your mind focused on the sensations of the breath in your body, if that's your meditative object. In the context of just virtuous actions in general, it means the same thing. Keeping your mind focused on virtue, not getting distracted, not going off virtue. So keeping your mind focused on virtue. Introspection refers to another quality of mind, which is noticing when your mind is off the object. It doesn't do anything to bring it back. Your mindfulness is what brings it back. But the introspection is just kind of like a watchdog for your mind, noticing. Now, for our meditation practice, the two main obstacles are sometimes we call laxity or dullness, and that's everything from this sort of zoned out, spaced out feeling to falling asleep on the meditation cushion, that whole spectrum. The other obstacle is sometimes called distraction, agitation, excitement is another word for it, and that's just like mental chatter and a lot of distraction. So instead of being able to keep our mind focused on the breath, if that's our object, we're always getting distracted by other thoughts. Lots of proliferation of conceptual thoughts in our mind. For a lot of us, that's the main obstacle to our meditation. So our introspection is like a watchdog that notices, are we off the object or not? We train our introspection to kick in as quickly as possible so that we don't waste time in our meditation practice. So the minute we're off the object, the minute we're either distracted or we're dull and sleepy, we notice it and then our mind goes back to the object. So again, off the cushion, it's exactly the same thing. Are we keeping our mind on virtue or not? And we notice really quickly if we're off the object of virtue. If we're, our mind is going into non-virtuous thoughts, our speech is going into non-virtuous speech, that's a big one. Our actions are going into non-virtuous actions. We notice quickly and return with mindfulness back to virtue. Conscientiousness or heedfulness is another quality where we're just kind of heedful of where our mind is going. It's more kind of like an umbrella awareness of the activity of our mind and whether our mind in general is sort of sticking with virtue or if it's going off. We're getting totally carried away. Heedlessness is said to be one of the main reasons for actually breaking our vows, whether it's our lay vows, our monastic vows, our bodhisattva vows. There's a few factors that lead to the breaking of a vow. This is sort of a lack of awareness of what we're doing. Heedlessness. So heedfulness is sort of more an umbrella sort of awareness of what we're doing, our actions of body, speech, and mind. So let's look at these verses. Verse 68 is talking about conscientiousness or heedfulness. And it says, just as a seasoned soldier engages in a fencing battle with the enemy, so shall I avoid the weapon of the afflictions and attack the enemies that are the afflictions. So it's saying here our heedfulness applies to two things. One thing is avoiding the afflictions, but when we feel that they're there, we attack them, right? We try to counteract the afflictions. So one is the heedfulness that avoids the afflictions even coming into our minds. But once we feel that the afflictions have really entered our minds and are starting to take control, then we try to oppose them through the antidotes. And that's a long story. There's very specific antidotes to all of the mental afflictions that we also study